You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Sometimes the most powerful messages about our changing world can come through the arts, through the most popular films and television series. Perhaps these plot lines could influence more people than, dare I say it, journalism. Today we're having some fun with some analysis of the silver screen. Hi and welcome to Climate Conversations. I'm Jack Board. Li Ling Tan is here too. Hello to you.
Hello. Oscar season is upon us. Well, soon upon us. I know, right? That's pretty exciting. Never thought we'd actually have the chance to dedicate an entire episode to movies and shows. So great topic, great assignment. And Jack, what did you do for your prep?
I didn't watch any sci-fi. Probably the main research I did was to try and work out when season 2 of The Last of Us is coming out because I'm eagerly anticipating that. Did you have some time on the couch?
I've been watching the series Silo, and basically it's about this bunch of people who are in this underground silo, and for generations they've been there. Some of them try to get out, and it's just a wasteland. I'm really condensing it.
Sounds kind of fun.
And it really kind of ties into a lot of the stuff we'll be talking about today.
I've been watching The Peaky Blinders.
No.
So that's definitely not science fiction.
Yeah, that's for another show.
Let's start with our quiz then. As you said, award season right upon us. So I want you to tell me, Li Ling, the science fiction film that has won the most Academy Awards. And then also, which one is the highest grossing at the box office?
This is not easy, Jack. All right, let me percolate.
Okay, you can play at home as well and stay tuned for the answers at the end of the podcast. Environmental calamity, the end of the world, wars over resources, disappearing water, and fantastic technological innovations. These are the sorts of topics and issues regularly explored in galaxies far, far away. But they're also part of our regular conversations, our analysis, and our future predictions about climate change. There are so many allegories hidden within film and television, not to mention books and art, about our relationship with the planet and how we manage it. There are parallels everywhere we look.
And today we look at some of the most iconic films, past and present, including some Oscar nominees that envision a future following a cataclysmic event and how these films hold huge relevance for us today. And we have a special guest to help us explore this even more, or nerd it out if you like. It's Jamie Ooi from the Science Centre Singapore, a sci-fi geek herself, just like me. Welcome to the show, Jamie.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, Jamie, before we dive into this geek talk, let's talk a little bit about your science credentials so our listeners kind of know this is serious business, right?
Sure. So I'm currently a transmedia science writer at Science Centre Singapore. However, before I became a science writer, I was a sci-fi scholar. My background is in literature and film. I did my master's at Nanyang Technological University exploring environmental themes in Singapore science fiction. I've also published research on climate change representations in popular culture, but most exciting of which I've been a long time fan of, is Star Wars. I'm so very happy to geek out over this conversation.
So we've all had some homework to pick a couple of titles that we're going to bring to the table for some further discussion around all of this. And Li Ling, you're going to kick us off, right?
Yes, I am. And I'm really excited about this. Okay. So I'm starting with a character from a film a few years back, and see if you guys can guess who I'm talking about and which cinematic franchise. So there's this dude.
I bet you I can't tell you.
Well, this. All right. Okay. No. Feel free to make a wild guess as well. So I'm talking about this dude. The dude is a warlord. On the surface, he's a supervillain. He wants to annihilate half the world's population, believing that it's the only way to protect resources and stabilize the system. And in order to turn half the world to dust, he needs to find 6 gemstones that embody space, time, mind, reality, power, and soul. So he's a
Okay,
complex
so
character.
for people who are listening to this only,
Yes.
Li-Ling is now holding some kind of colourful mug with what appear to be precious gems all over
That's
it.
right.
And I don't know what that means.
So this, dear Jack, let me educate you, is the Infinity Gauntlet. And it has those 6 gemstones that I was just talking about, embodying space, time, mind, reality, power, and soul. Jamie, you're familiar with this, right? Tell me you are.
Of course.
So,
Yeah. So that's, I mean, it's definitely Thanos right off the bat. I think Avengers and Marvel's a really interesting angle to look at this topic. Superheroes, so many of them are inspired by what animals can do in nature. I'm just thinking of Batman, Spider-Man,
Yeah.
Hawkeye, you name it.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of this concept of biomimicry, where we're looking at how nature solves problems to inspire how we can innovate technologically. So spider silk being almost 5 times stronger than steel, Spider-Man's abilities to stop moving trains with his webs. So the entire Avengers Marvel series to me is about superpowered humans, but also thinking about the abilities of animals and how extraordinary they are. So just thinking about Thanos made me think about how so many superheroes, not just the ones that are explicitly sort of eco-minded in their aims, a lot of them actually do have a lot of resonances with environmental topics.
Okay, I don't know about this. Okay, I've heard of Thanos, but I'm not really familiar with the films. Pretty interesting idea, though. If we halve the world's population, would that be an agent to actually save the planet? And I'm sure there's a lot of evidence that would suggest that yes, it would objectively be better for the world that we inhabit. Obviously, it's not possible except in the Marvel universe.
what about you, Jamie?
Okay, Jamie, yeah, let's go to you. I know you already flagged your interest in Star Wars, so let's see. Another series I'm not really not
Oh
very
my
familiar
goodness, Jack.
with. Sorry.
Don't get out much, do you? Oh, actually, maybe you do instead of
Not
sitting
too much,
home.
maybe.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to talk about that. So when I tell most people that I looked at environmental themes in Star Wars for my research, a lot of them are surprised because they're thinking, lightsaber duels, space dogfights, Millennium Falcon. How is any of that green? But what interests me about this series, and I mean, it's sprawled way beyond the 9 Skywalker Saga films. There's countless comic books, TV shows, video games. But what's common throughout all of those intellectual property is this idea of the Force. So the Force in Star Wars is this all-encompassing energy field that connects all beings. But it's a little bit more complicated than that. What interests me is that that's a really cool metaphor for ecosystems and how humans are never fully divorced from their environments. We're always somehow connected to minerals, to plants, to animals. And Jedi Knights, in some ways, they're peacekeepers of the galaxy. They're also people who try to balance ecosystems and are really attuned to their environments. So the line I always like to say is that before Luke Skywalker was introduced to us as a Jedi, he was introduced to the world as a moisture farmer, somebody who's trying to eke out an honest living, trying to get water on a desert planet that's quite barren.
And Star Wars did really well. I think it was ahead of its time in terms of talking about a future barren landscape.
Yeah, we can really chart the development actually of the environmental movement and its main concerns by looking at scenes of planetary destruction in Star Wars. There's another scholar, Toby Nielsen, who talks about how when the planet Alderaan, which looks like Earth, is destroyed in the first Star Wars films, it explodes almost like nuclear Armageddon.
Yeah.
It really brings to light these Cold War anxieties, these threats of nuclear wastelands. But if you look at more recent examples of planet destruction in Star Wars The Force Awakens, the 2015 film,
I've seen that
when
one.
this planet, yes, excellent. Okay, great. So when this planet, the planet Ilum, I believe, is destroyed, it's much slower than the original 1977 film. And instead of just blowing up in a giant spectacle, it's actually shown to go through a number of natural disasters. So there are these earthquakes, there are these avalanches, and it's a little bit more drawn out. So even just by looking at what is our immediate assumption of what a planetary disaster looks like in these Star Wars films, we can begin to see some changes throughout the different films as well.
Okay, I might be convinced to go back and make an effort with it. I've seen the new ones, but never gone back to the original 3. So, all right, it could be. I can consider this like work research now. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Dune. It is something that I have watched and I do enjoy. Kind of love the cinematography and the style, the aesthetic of these 2 films so far. The desert landscape is mysterious. There are big worms tunneling around. Soundtrack is good as well. Some of the acting, okay, I'm not huge on. But we can look past that. Now, of course, Dune is a book turned film written originally by Frank Herbert in the 1960s, which for me, I guess, makes some of the messages of the story even more prescient. So explores firstly the perils of the scarcity of resources. And a lot of the plot revolves around this planet of Arrakis, where there's this magical substance called spice, which is being mined, essentially exploitation of this environment to power the other much more powerful races and planets, etc. So I think we learn about indigenous adaptation. The Fremen, who are the local people of Arrakis, have proven their ability to survive and thrive on this hostile planet. Despite the water scarcity, they have learnt to cope and also conserve the resource. And then you have conflict brewing. And it's this tale of greed, of short-term thinking, endless pursuit of extraction, capital interests over environmental conservation. And the result of all of that is war. So, Jamie, you've obviously looked into Dune a lot as well.
I can't comment on the acting, but it strikes me that the desert world in itself becomes a sort of character. There are so many desert planets around science fiction franchises. Arrakis was the inspiration in many ways for the desert planet of Tatooine in Star Wars. And Frank Herbert himself dedicates his first Dune book to the dryland ecologist. He got the idea for Dune by going on a magazine assignment, I believe, to cover a United States Department of Agriculture project on the Oregon dunes. So he was looking at how they were trying to use, I believe it's called poverty grasses, to stabilize the sand dunes. So this image of the barren wasteland, this entire planet that's engulfed by sand, has dominated so much of sci-fi, especially in the Western world. I also had the privilege of studying in Abu Dhabi, and the empty quarter, the world's largest uninterrupted stretch of sand, is partially where the film was actually filmed on location. And what's interesting is that most people think of Empty Quarter as empty because very few humans live and subsist there. However, there are around 400 species that are native to the Arabian Peninsula there. It's home to sand foxes, lizards, hares. And the film does a great job of showing the indigenous ways of living on the desert, but also the life that lives in the desert. Timothée Chalamet's character, Paul Atreides, takes on this Fremen nickname that essentially means the desert mouse. And he takes that on as a very heroic moniker. So it's really inspiring how this film kind of reclaims the desert. And so I think the Dune series really hones in on why it's actually important to have a desert ecosystem.
And we look forward to the 3rd installment coming at some point soon. Okay, Li Ling, your turn.
I'll see your Dune and raise you Wall-E.
Okay.
So this one goes back, I think, maybe 2 decades. It's about this robot, right, that collects trash, salvages trash in some sort of post-apocalyptic, uninhabitable Earth. So Wall-E, our friendly little robot, meets an advanced model called Eva, falls in love with her, and shows her what might be the last living plant on the planet. They end up on a massive spacecraft that supports an entire civilization of obese people, a result of some sort of gravitational sciencey stuff that I won't get into, but also a result of their near complete dependency on machines and robots. And I think this might have been my first climate film, and it really, really struck an impression because it took such grown-up ideas, concepts, and put it in a cartoon really. And I think it resonated really well for me as a young adult. And Jack and you and I, we constantly talk about how difficult it is to engage listeners. I think films and TV shows are a great conduit for getting the message across. Oh, and then of course, we need to talk about zombie flicks. I mean, come on. right? Zombie flicks.
Are you only meant to have
Yeah,
two?
okay. I just want to, we just need to have a conversation about zombie movies and like the epidemic, the pandemic, especially, out of COVID and all.
Yeah, I've got a bit of a pandemic suggestion coming later. So just stand by. Okay, Jamie, what's your next offering?
I was thinking about how so much of sci-fi is, especially cli-fi, which is science fiction that's looking at the future of what's going to happen with global warming on our planet. So much of it, yes, cli-fi, is kind of depressing. It's dystopian, very gritty. And Li-Ling, when you were talking about science fiction, how it comments on the apocalypse, that we're facing extinction, what does that mean for us? The film I wanted to bring to the table is Pacific Rim, a 2013 blockbuster by Guillermo del Toro. Basically, giant robots piloted by humans are deployed to fight giant monsters called kaiju that emerge out of an interdimensional breach at the bottom of a Pacific Ocean. That's why it's called Pacific Rim. But the reason why I chose this film was because it's a surprisingly sincere and kind of shockingly hopeful display of resistance in the end times. These pilots band together from diverse backgrounds across racial, cultural, national affiliations. They have to, in order to pilot this massive robot that's 7,000 tons, it's too much for one person. So they have to work in these teams. They invent this technology called neural bridging, where essentially these two brains can combine, share consciousness, and be able to operate using complex brain chemistry, are able to calibrate their movements to the movements of this giant robot. And for me, that's really inspiring because it shows how, in order to solve this crisis, we need to cooperate, we need to have empathy, we need to work in teams. It can't just be one solo hero trying to defeat an entire empire or whatever evil thing has emerged. The film also has this little moment where the scientist mentions that, these aliens are emerging out of the ocean because we terraformed the Earth essentially to make it habitable for them. Global warming has risen the temperature levels in the film to a degree where it's actually more conducive for alien life. So that context is there throughout the plot. And lastly, the last thing I'll say is just 2025 is Pacific Rim year. The main story of the film is set in 2025. So the movie came out 2013. The main bulk of the plot is set in 2025. So I just think it's a really timely response and a very joyful response too to how we can, as Idris Elba says in the film, we can cancel the apocalypse.
We've spoken about Godzilla before on this podcast.
I know, thinking that.
Yes, I listened to that. It was excellent.
The environmental birth of the kind of the Godzilla myth. Talking about that, Jamie, it kind of made me think about COP. I'm like, okay, so you got all these nations working together to solve this big problem. I'm like, maybe if we get to COP 500 or something, it'll have merged from a really boring conference to some kind of robot fighting mechanism. And I doubt it'll go as smoothly as it does in the film, given the current levels of cooperation among countries in the world. Okay, my last one is, for me, an HBO series that I'm sure you've both seen, super popular, The Last of Us. Another example, actually, of an adapted story. This one's from a video game. And basically, mushrooms are taking over. So it's a fungal outbreak across the globe, and then what we get is complete societal collapse as a result. The outbreak is driven by a breakdown in the climate, and you have this mutated cordyceps fungus, which is empowered by rising global temperatures, evolving to infect humans, which then leads to a global pandemic. So you have this extreme weather playing out as the backdrop. People are essentially environmental refugees. Conflict arises over a fight, once again, for resources. People increasingly getting desperate. Have you guys watched? Thoughts?
Yes, I can't wait.
About the fungus?
I cannot wait for the next season. Have you seen this one, Jamie?
I confess I actually haven't seen the series, but I know it's predicated on cordyceps. And when we're talking about parallels to real life, thinking about the Siberian permafrost and how all of these woolly mammoth bones are emerging. And if there's talking about speculative science, because science fiction is always extrapolating what's happening currently technologically and imagining what happens next. So yeah, I'm just really fascinated by how that particular series kind of runs with these ideas of how, I mean, we've all experienced pandemics, so the ways in which viruses, humans, plants all kind of intermingle and really do affect each other.
Yeah, and a lot of these films that we're seeing about outbreaks involve areas with high population densities, right? So they spread really quickly with humans as the vectors. There was
I
contagion.
think it's Jakarta, right, that this outbreak begins in the show.
And that was interesting, too, that so much of this, it's such a universal thing. It's not just an isolated incident that spreads across the United States, for example. I mean, we had outbreak, and then, of course, after that, we had contagion and the gazillion zombie films about viruses that spread across cities, borders, and then engulfing the whole planet.
Jamie, why do you think, from your research and your work, why do you think these types of films and shows are so popular, entertaining? Why do people want to engage with these worlds? Yet at the same time, the same attention isn't really being paid that much in our real world, it feels, a lot of the time.
I think science fiction is the genre of our times in many ways. I sometimes feel like we already live in a very sci-fi world. I'm just thinking of how when you see images of Mount Fuji without snow, what is a normal environment anymore? Even reality itself seems to be kind of warped when you hear about these rather weird weather and natural disasters happening around the world. So I think sci-fi is speaking to a lot of current anxieties about global warming, but it also offers us the imaginative potential to think about possible futures, to imagine ways in which technology, like in Pacific Rim, might create empathy and help us really collaborate together to tackle some of our biggest issues. Science fiction has always also inspired science. It's a feedback loop. It's a two-way street. I'm also thinking about how there was a molecular biologist who, in University of British Columbia, who created a fictional IPCC report on Tatooine. So IPCC meaning the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, but he changed it to Intergalactic Panel on Climate Change. He used that as a popular teaching tool to teach people, oh, okay, here's 100 years after the Battle of Yavin, how Tatooine turns into an even hotter planet. He was using that to do a lot of science communication and show how these kind of reports and how scientists reach consensus on climate change effects. So science fiction and science always inspire each other. And I'm really hopeful that this can help us recalibrate what it means to be human in our relationship with Earth.
Great.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. Jamie, do you want to stay for the quiz? We should get her to do the quiz, right?
Okay. Oh, okay.
Okay, to repeat the question for you, can you tell me, both of you, the science fiction film that won the most Academy Awards? And then also, which is the highest grossing at the box office?
I think the sci-fi film that won the most Academy Awards, Interstellar, maybe. And then for the highest grossing, I would say Avatar.
Li Ling, do you have any contrary thoughts?
I was going to go with Avatar for biggest box office hit. With the most Academy Awards, I have no idea. Can you give me a hint? Was it recent?
It was very recent, yeah.
What is that thing with Michelle Yeoh? What is that one? Everything, Everywhere, All at Once?
Everything, Everywhere, All at Once.
Oh, ding, ding, ding. Well done, Li Ling. That is correct. Yeah, that
Nice.
Everything, Everywhere, All at Once was nominated for 11 Oscars and won 7. Just beating out Gravity, which also won 7, but it was only nominated for 10. And Jamie, you're correct. Avatar, the highest grossing science fiction film of all time, around $3 billion. Good job.
Thank you, Jamie. This was fun.
Thanks, Jamie. Great to have you on. Yeah, super interesting discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for arranging this.
Okay, that's it for this episode of Climate Conversations. Thanks for joining us. Please do come give us some feedback. Come connect with us. We'd love to hear from you.
And I'm Li Ling Tan. We'll see you back here next week, same time, same place.
I'm Jack Board. Thanks as always to the team that put together this podcast. Saye Win, Tiffany Ung, Janani Johari, and Crispina Robert.